The Namibia University of Science and Technology is driven by its vision to be a premier university, preparing leaders for the knowledge economy. The university remains committed to being responsive, creatively meeting the needs of students, society, and the economy through multiple pathways for excellent education, applied research, innovation, and service in collaboration with University of Science and Technology. Situated in the center of the university boasts state-of-the-art facilities to support its teaching and learning, research, and services. To achieve the socio-economic goals set for Namibia in Vision 2030, the university offers 90 under- and postgraduate market-driven qualifications, developed in close collaboration with the industry, national and international partners through its 6 faculties. The Faculty of Computing and Informatics offers bachelor's, bachelor honors, master's, and PhD qualifications in computer sciences and informatics. As one of the oldest faculties on campus, the Faculty of Engineering hosts the Material Testing Institute that provides advanced education through the continuous professional development, applied research, and consultancy in different engineering projects. The Faculty of Health and Applied Sciences provides professional programs aimed at improving public health through diagnosis, patient care and management, emergency medical care, and care for the environment, as well as natural sciences, mathematics, and statistics. The Faculty of Human Sciences consists of the departments of Communication, Languages and Education, and Social Sciences, and offers, amongst others, qualifications in journalism and media technology and criminal justice. The Faculty of Management Sciences is the largest faculty and hosts 2 postgraduate units, the Harold Pupkewitz Graduate School of Business and Namibia's Graduate School of Accounting. The Faculty of Natural Resources and Spatial Sciences impart knowledge and skills in its graduates, required in the sustainable utilization and management of natural resources, contributing to a sustained national economic growth and competitiveness. The faculty's strategies and actions are aligned to ensure they remain relevant to the Namibian nation and the global society through the Integrated Land Management Institute and the Agribusiness and Technology Development Center. The university also hosts the Center for Open and Lifelong Learning, the Cooperation Education Unit, and the Teaching and Learning Unit promoting academic excellence. Research and innovation are supported by the Namibia Business Innovation Institute, the Technology Transfer Office, Innovation Design Lab, and Fab Lab Namibia. Namibia Energy Institute, NEI, a national institute founded by the Ministry of Mines and Energy, hosted at Namibia University of Science and Technology, envisages a sustainable energy supply structure based on widespread use of renewable energy. The Namibia Energy Institute is unique in that it not only is a training and capacity building institution, but also conducts research and development. It is becoming increasingly clear that the climate change is an inevitable process. Increasing climatic variability would have serious implications for the supply of food, energy, and water, which forms the basis of a self-sufficient economy. The impact will be amplified through the interconnections and interdependence among these 3 resources, popularly known as the food, energy, water nexus. NUST intends to address the nexus challenge by investigating technology options to address food and livelihood security in both urban and rural contexts, hence looking into substance solutions as part of a mixed livelihood strategy, which requires an integrated model strengthened by indigenous knowledge systems linked to highly competitive technology advancement and adoption options. Namibia is endowed with natural resources required for renewable energy supplies from the sun, wind, and biomass from invader bush. NUST will continue to contribute to the knowledge pool and clean energy development pathway in order to inform scaling up the use of renewable energy and energy-efficient technologies. NUST will advance the development of decision support software, which will enable clinicians to adhere to best practices research, including research on small wireless biomedical sensors and ultra-wide.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Welcome back. We are simply continuing the event, and also would like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Masake, the acting dean of the Faculty of Human Sciences, who was the director of ceremony for the morning section. So we're now moving forward to the afternoon session. And with the afternoon section, we have basically the panel discussion, and it's 2 o'clock. Would like to start the program. So I stand by the protocol observed by the directors of ceremony in the morning, and therefore would like to invite to the podium or to the virtual podium, Dr. Onesmo Shungula, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Health and Applied Sciences, to deliver the opening remarks and introduction of the event. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, Professor. For better connectivity, I am going to switch off my camera and then I'll deliver my remarks. So, Director of Ceremonies, Professor Semente, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to deliver these remarks that will lead up to the panel discussion focused on the topic living in the world of pandemics. First of all, pandemics are not new. There have been outbreaks over centuries. One can, for example, remember smallpox, the bubonic plague, the Spanish flu, and many other pandemics that we used to hear that happened centuries ago. Now, most notably during our own lifetime, is the COVID-19 pandemic. In most countries, this pandemic exposed the systemic weaknesses and inconsistencies that perpetrate the vulnerabilities of its citizens. In most cases, the most affected are the poor, those people that must move around in search for cash income, those who work in insecure and risky jobs for a wage, and those that are without a proper home. However, this COVID-19 pandemic went even far beyond that. It went on to show us that health is not equal to a healthcare system alone. So we saw this by looking at the example of the northern province in Italy, a very wealthy province of Lombardy, which had a well-funded hospital system. However, when COVID-19 came, the system collapsed and led to higher incidences of COVID-19 deaths. The British healthcare system, which is also one of the best in the world, also collapsed. And we have seen other similar phenomena around the world, thereby indicating to us that even if you have a better healthcare system, other items also need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Director of Ceremonies, this should teach us that the world needs to rethink how we approach health and life in general. It is a recognition that we cannot be healthy until we build a world with safe housing, good schools, better wages, gender and racial equality. We must also aim for clean air, drinkable water, and a fair economy where there are essentially no haves and have-nots. All must be equal. We must create a more sustainable and desirable world for our future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, if this sound all utopian, let me point out that the same principles are actually contained in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. However, the world seems to be going slowly in working towards the achievement of the SDGs. Perhaps it's because they don't appear to be emergencies in the same way that a pandemic is. Director of Ceremonies, ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, let me also point out that this pandemic also came at a time when science is quite advanced. And as a result, vaccines could be developed in a record time, which unfortunately has put doubts also in the minds of many people. To illustrate and appreciate this advancement in science, let us look at the following timelines in the history of development of vaccines and see how the development time period have improved significantly. So the first example that I have here is the polio outbreak, which was in the USA in 1894. And the virus itself was identified in 1909. However, it took 45 years before we reached the stage whereby the first trial of the vaccine was actually tried out on humans. So 45 years in the development of the vaccine. 90 years later, in 1999, another virus called the West Nile virus also broke out in the USA. And that time now, it took only 4 years to get to the stage whereby a vaccine was developed and it could be tried out on humans. So thereby the development time has been reduced by 91%, from 45 years to 4 years. And then in 2002, the SARS broke out in China, and the virus itself was isolated in March 2003. And it took 21 months to develop and try out the vaccine. So again, from 4 years to 21 months, that is a reduction of 56%. And then now going to COVID-19, which broke out at the end of 2019. And as early as March 2020, we already had a vaccine that was already being tried out on humans. And that simply means that it took about 4 months. And again, one can see a significant reduction in the development time from 21 months to 4 months. That is quite significant. Ladies and gentlemen, now and then we hear that people are also hesitant to take vaccines because they don't believe that they are effective. However, that seems not really to be the case because they are more skeptical due to the shortness of the period over which the vaccines were developed. However, research can still tell us more. Therefore, instead of dreading the future and worry about what other misfortunes remain hidden, with science, we should remain hopeful and optimistic about humankind's ability to reimagine and reinvent ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude now, I would like to mention that the next panel discussion will unpack the impacts of COVID-19 both globally and particularly in Namibia. I thank you, and it's over to you, Director of Ceremonies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shungula, for these introductory remarks, which really sets again the tone for our discussion this afternoon regarding the panel discussion regarding living in a world of pandemics with the focus of health, employment, digital transformation, and economic sustainability. You well said, Doctor, that health is no longer just an health issue. It's in fact a societal issue, and we were able to observe more specifically during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. You've mentioned examples of Italy and the British care system that collapsed, which really had other effects within the society and then economic factors as well. So one of the key issues that you mentioned is that the pandemic came at a time where science is advanced, and therefore breakthrough in science in terms of vaccines actually are there to really make or curb this pandemic. Thank you very much. I think such themes and ideas are reoccurring from day one, day two, and now it culminates here with the panel discussion. So with these few words, I would like to call upon the moderator, Dr. Ville, who is the director of the Harold Popkowitz Graduate School of Business at the Namibia University of Science, is going to lead the proceedings of the discussion. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Chair and Dr. Shungula. Thank you for that introduction and comments. We have 4 panelists who will be joining us today for our discussion. And it's indeed a privilege to meet all of you, and let me introduce the 4 panelists through to the rest of the participants here. We have Dr. Mukesi, who is the Associate Dean at the Faculty of Health and Applied Sciences here at NUST. We have Ms. Melverine Theron, who is the Procurement Manager, AMI, who is the Deputy Director, Macro Models and Financial Stability at the Bank of Namibia. And we have Ms. Rusa Nandago, who is standing in for Mr. Solomohai, who is the chairperson of the Namibia Statistics Agency. So it's panelists, it's indeed a pleasure to meet you and a privilege to meet you all. And we are looking forward to your insights and your contributions to this important topic that we are discussing today. So welcome again to the session. Just a bit of context quickly. I think many of the changes driven by the coronavirus pandemic are likely to be permanent. At this stage, we have all sort of adjusted our lifestyles to the pandemic and its requirements. And if there's anyone in this session who says that they have not adjusted, I'm going to take that with a pinch of salt. Data from polling organizations, from consultants globally, and research analysts all make similar points. Some aspects of life will return to the way they were before, but many will not. Pew Research Center in the USA reported that 51% of the people they surveyed believed that their lives would remain changed in major ways. Researchers also offer some baseline predictions that technology, of course, will continue to allow people to work, shop, study remotely, and many people will continue the habits they have acquired since March 2019. But a key alert here is that what we have witnessed during the past year or so is that it is evident that racial and economic inequalities may deepen if we don't address them forcefully. Now let us turn to our panelists and get some insights on how they see the impact of the pandemic on the sub-themes of this afternoon's session, which is on health, on employment, on digital transformation, and economic sustainability. So my first question will be posed to Ms. Nandago, and the following is the question. The pandemic has triggered one of the worst job crises in recent memory. The World Bank reports in particular that women, the young, and the lesser educated were likely at the disadvantage in the labor market during this time. What should we consider in redressing this situation? For example, on the space of the policy front, skills development, and so on and so forth. Ms. Nandago, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I just want to make sure that I am visible and also audible.
Indeed.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion today. And I'll get straight into the answer with regards to the employment situation in the country and the impact of COVID-19. So of course, we know that the lockdowns and the slowdown in the economy that we had last year and this year had quite a severe impact on specifically business operations. And as a result, we saw a lot of people being retrenched or losing their jobs, either permanently or on a temporary basis, either because businesses had to close completely or because the businesses had to reduce their labor force expenditure in order to survive. But I think what's really important to remember is that, and something I think that we tend to forget, is that all these problems already existed before COVID-19. And what COVID did is it really worsened an already bad situation in terms of our employment situation. For example, our unemployment rate in 2018 was at 33.4% already overall. And if you just take the youth unemployment, it was at 46.1%. So which shows us that we already kind of had a job crisis in the country. And our unemployment rate is one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. I think we are only second to South Africa, or I think we might actually be higher than South Africa. And if you compare our unemployment rate to other employment rates across the world, so for example, in the US, during the pandemic, their unemployment rate was at 8.3%. So a comparison between 8.3% and 33.4% really shows you that we already had unemployment rates at crisis levels. But in terms of addressing the situation of the employment or job crisis in the country, I think it's very important to remember that employment is a function of the overall performance or structure of the economy. And so if you want to address a job crisis, you need to create jobs, of course, it's quite obvious, right? But to create jobs, it's very important that we need to grow the economy. And we need to grow the economy in a way that is sustainable and in a way that is broad-based. That means that our growth that we have in the economy should not only be focused on one or two sectors, but it should really span across most sectors. And that is the only way we're going to create sustainable job employment. It's also important that we create jobs that are not only temporary or short-term due to, for example, some construction projects that we have, but rather jobs that can extend over time. So one of the ways we can do that, and this is not really something new, I think it's something a lot of economists and policymakers have been saying over the years, is we need to make sure that we create a conducive business environment for businesses to thrive. So we need to create an environment that allows businesses to make it easy for them to start up, first of all, but also make it easy for them to survive. So for example, we have a very cumbersome process in terms of starting a business and the different agencies you have to run around to get your different forms that you need to start a business. We have a lot of bureaucratic processes when it comes to our business operations. So we really need to solve that. And of course, there's also some policy impediments to starting a business in the country. So for example, we have some pieces of legislation that are still outstanding, such as the Investment Promotion Act, the Public Procurement Act, and also the Employment Equity Bill that is still long-standing. And this creates a lot of uncertainty. And of course, when you have uncertainty in the economy, no one will want to invest because they're not sure if their investment will yield results in the future. So I think one of the key things is really to make sure that we have business growth so that our employment can be private sector led. I know sometimes we often tend to hear in response to the job crisis is that the government must create jobs, the government must create jobs. But I think it's very important to understand that the role of the government is more to create a conducive environment for private sector to create jobs, and that we should really keep the job creation aspect from a government perspective quite minimal and only to those roles that are needed within the government for the government to function. So I'll say that's the one aspect that we need to look at. The second aspect that we have in Namibia that really hinders our job market is what we economists call a skills mismatch. So what that means is that the skills that are required in the market, so the skills that are required by companies and corporates, etc., do not match the skills that the graduates have. And I'll give an example in the banking industry, which is where I am at. We are moving towards a more data-driven business. So we really require data analysts and individuals who are very strong in the quantitative fields. And that means then we need to make sure that our curriculum, not only at the tertiary level, but even at the secondary or primary school level, that our curriculum really matches what the job market is looking for. And I mentioned data analysts and quantitative analysts, but I think that's just for banking industry, that's important. But I think broadly, we need to learn how to incorporate some of these elements of the future of work into the different curriculums. So for example, if someone is studying HR, why can't we have a curriculum that incorporates those elements of data or quantitative analysis into the HR curriculum, for example, so that we learn how to use data and learn how to use quantitative methods to do our jobs. So I think I'll just highlight those two before I talk too much. But I think those are really the two critical things that we need to look at in terms of the employment situation, that is creating a conducive private sector business environment and also addressing the skills mismatch that's currently occurring in our economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. Maybe to the participants, if you have any questions, please jot them down and keep them for later so that when we get through this presentation, we can then direct questions to the different panelists. My next question would be to Mr. Ron. The pandemic also compelled us to look to technology, and in particular digital transformation, to meet the new demands of organizations. How, in your view, has digital transformation impacted the way we do things today?
Hi, good afternoon, esteemed guests and panelists. I'm Alvarine Theron, Procurement Manager of Deep Marine. Can everyone see my screen? I just want to get that right. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can.
All right. I would also just like to share my screen. So I'm going to do a presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you. So how has digital transformation impacted the way we do things? For me, the impact of digital transformation has really upped the ante in the way we live and work. It has made things more real time. It has increased that impact of how you interact both in your professional life and in your personal life. I think from a work perspective, it's made meetings more focused, more efficient. I feel that, the African culture of you meet at either the meeting starts at 2 for 2:30 or 3, that was eliminated. There's a culture change, a step change in that direction. We're faster, we're better. That's the mindset that has been cultivated. And then obviously there's artificial intelligence, like when you switch on your WhatsApp, Siri starts to tell you who you must call your mother, call your husband or whatever. So we've got that's added to our lives. There's easy access to information and portals. In a work environment, I think if you're working in a multi-international or company like myself, we got access to during COVID and now past to information that we won't normally have access to and that we weren't normally exposed to, or that we weren't even aware of. Maybe we had access, we were just not aware of it. Obviously, there was less human interaction, more virtual. Like, I mean, I think 2-3 years ago, Polytech, wouldn't have probably had a virtual discussion like this. Everything was in a normal lecture hall and lots of people attending, making sure everyone attends and so forth. There's, I think, a lot more, mental stress, mental emotional stress. I think because a lot of what we do operates in our heads. What the digital era is also showing is that the ability of humans to fast adapt to changing environments. And then obviously from an organizational perspective, there were planned digital projects that were suddenly expedited, and many organizations were catapulted into going live on digital platforms or on the cloud or so forth. So this is just my personal take from what the impact is of this digital transformation. And obviously the list isn't, it's not, you can go on and on about it. What I do think has happened though, in terms of where we're at, is that it's the mindset of the digital age that we're living in now. It starts with the people and not necessarily the technology that we're exposed to. So how do we change people's mindset? That is the question. That is, the thing that we really should be addressing to cope in this transformed environment. And the thing is, the less mature you are in terms of adapting to change, adapting to the new, the more challenging this transforming age is going to become. Obviously, the more mature you are in change, the more mature you are as an organization, the more mature you are as an industry, the more opportunities you'll have in terms of the digital transformation era that we're in, or space that we're in. And the question is, what is your organization's strategy? What is your personal strategy in terms of your mindset and reinventing yourself? So Deloitte has coined this term, and they practice this consulting body of information called digital DNA, where you need to start reimagining who you are, what is your career, and what is your work that you do, what is the organization. You need to reimagine yourself in this new digital environment, and organizations need to redefine themselves in terms of this this environment. We've now had to think about hybrid working environments. For example, with us, we have 2 weeks on in the office and 2 weeks working from home. Hybrid working environment. I know from the high-tech organizations, how they've done this is they've got rooms now with huge PowerPoint or huge flat screens, where when you have a virtual meeting like the one we're having, faces are displayed on huge screens so that you have that interface with your colleagues. And then, of course, you need to be trained in digital leadership. To lead virtually, I know, and I'm sure for many of you, even the Polytech lecturers having to lecture virtually, you needed to lead differently. You needed to actually teach yourself new skills to be able to capture your students, to be able to engage with them. And then, of course, in this digital era, you need to walk that talk. You can't just expect things to change and not be that change. This digital DNA methodology that is practiced and that Deloitte actually consults on has 23 traits to test maturity levels and to stay relevant. So they would test your organization's ability to fail faster, failing forward faster, to be more agile, shifting decision rights and power, and understanding whether your organization is a flat working structure where decisions are smooth and you're able to be agile and fluid. So that's also a mechanism to test how relevant you are in this changing environment. I think also how we've transformed and coped as a country. Recently, the president appointed the task force to draft the national digital strategy. We've had a lot of debate around the regulations and pending law for access to information. We have CRAN, we have the Electronic Banking Act and the protection of the POCA Act, which I think are all showing the maturity levels that we as a nation are going into, and showing the national commitment to this digital transformation and the environment that we operate in. And then I think for me, one of the things that really hit home to me was how important it is that we look after our mental health during this digital age, stretching particularly from our stresses, the way we handle our stress. I think we can all say that COVID had this very subconscious stress that you needed to cope with. And it was, I don't know, you couldn't have had a handbook to be able to deal with it, the ups and downs and the uncertainty. But also what being in front of your computer has done is that you had to manage different type of emotions. You weren't interacting with your colleagues as much, face to face, but you had to do it over the screen, and you needed to make sure your mic was working, and you needed to not read into emails too much. So you needed coping. You need to teach yourself how to manage your emotions. We were fortunate that we had a lot of mental health activations at work. So our wellness department would schedule coffee dates with you virtually and go through some of iterations to just check where you are at. You need, for mental health, you need to make sure you take time out and do the things you enjoy. If you have children and for yourself, you need to manage screen time, whether it's TV or iPad or whatever. And then, of course, how to really try and see that you have healthy social interactions and not, become depressed and lonely and not have that human interaction. The other thing that you can do is to check your attitude, think about how you can be more grateful about your everyday life. And then obviously how you can show kindness and all these warm emotions that light up your demeanor and open the brain parts to be lighter. I think the other thing is, what we've learned is that it's good and healthy for us to spend time with people who light up when they see you. It releases the right hormones, and you're able to just enjoy life more and not think about getting into the next meeting and so forth. Also, coping with grief and loss. I don't think from a personal perspective, I had to cope with it as much as I had to during May, June, July of this year, when we got hit really hard with losing family members, and I think, you know, building that muscle is also important in the era we now live in. So that, in a nutshell, is my take on how this digital transformation has impacted the way we do things today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Maybe just as a follow-up question, you mentioned earlier about the lack of human interaction or less human interaction. And I was just wondering how did it impact people within your organization?
Okay, so the lack of human interaction. We, just to give you context in terms of the way we operate, we have a remote normal practice. So we've got 6 vessels on the ocean, and then we've got the head of office here. So what happened when COVID hit was we have a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off the vessel, where 800 of our employees work. And when COVID hit, we needed to extend that to 6 weeks, which is still the current state. And that had a huge impact on the state, the mental state of our employees. And the reason we know why that is because you need to quarantine. And our vessels are a confined space. If one person gets infected, the whole vessel is in danger, kind of thing. All thanks to the Almighty, we didn't get one outbreak of the COVID virus on any of our vessels. So, but we still, till today, have a quarantine of 2 weeks before you get on to the vessel, and then 2 weeks you're on the vessel, and then you need to have another 2 weeks when you get off quarantine before you can go home. And that, in this time where it was so much pressure from the pandemic, had very negative mental and social impact on our staff. I can add that we also lost a number of our colleagues due to the pandemic. But
Great,
that's
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm going to now step to Dr. Mushindami. I hope you're ready. In a presentation yesterday, we heard how the COVID pandemic impacted profitability of insurance companies in Namibia. Quite interesting. What are some of the policy initiatives we should consider to ensure economic sustainability?
Thank you, moderator. In fact, before I respond to the question, I wanted to put in perspective what we have actually seen and what have been put in place by the different regulators, as well as the government of Namibia. And since the financial sector is not isolated to what happens to the entire economy, it's just a mirror image of the performance of the economy. So if I may start, we have actually seen that the economy was already fragile from 2017. Already it had actually registered negative growth, 2017 and 2019. So adding on what Lusa have actually alluded to earlier, COVID just made the issues extremely worse, that we realized a big negative growth of minus 8.5% in 2020 due to the lockdowns that was actually brought in because of COVID. Now, coming to the sector, of course, both the banking, it's not only the decline in profitabilities that we have actually seen in 2020 is not only attributed to the non-bank financial institutions, but also to the banking sector. Of course, if one looks at for example, at the banking sector, we have actually seen the rate of return on assets declining from around an average of 23% to around 11% in June 2021. And of course, we see a similar trend in terms of, also if you look at the profitabilities, the assets of the banking sector have actually declined since COVID-19. Of course, that trend, we also see it. Despite that, for the non-banks, overall, we have actually seen that the assets have actually increased in December, if one takes the period between December 2020 to June 2021. Of course, but one needs to put it in perspective to say, for example, if one looks at the insurance and the pension fund industry, of course, a significant amount of their investments are into equities. And what we have actually seen is, especially in 2021, there have been a good performance in terms of the equity markets. And that tends to explain the better performance that we actually see in terms of the non-banking financial institutions, assets as well as their profitability. Now, before probably I say what needs to be done, because like I've said, the policies that needs to be put in place should not only look into the aspect of the banking and the non-banking financial institutions, but for the entire economy. Now, if one looks at what have actually been done in those spaces, starting with the financial sector, immediately after COVID hit in March 2020, we saw the central bank reducing the interest or the repo rate from 6.5% to the present, gradually to the present 3.75%. Of course, this is one of the lowest interest rates that we have actually seen. And the intention of the central bank was really to help the borrowers in terms of making sure that their repayments are easy on mortgages and other assets. In addition to that, we have actually seen the central bank introducing loan repayment holidays for 24 months, starting April 2020. Of course, that have actually been extended since last month to 36 months. And there was also a policy in terms of reducing the capital conservation buffer to zero. In fact, if I may try to explain what we mean by capital conservation buffer, is there is a certain percentage of capital that commercial banks are expected to hold. And on top of that, they were required, especially for the bigger banks, they were required to keep an extra 2% on top of the 10%, so that in the event of a crisis, they could actually they could withdraw from those capital and reinvest or issue credit. Of course, that 2% was actually abolished, and then so that to give extra liquidity to the banking sector so that they can on-lend to the private sector. Now, these policies were actually also replicated in the non-banks financial institution, especially the pension funds, as well as the insurance companies, where premium holidays were also guaranteed by NAMFISA, so as to help those institutions cope with the pandemic. And of course, the third element was actually the support that was given by the government in terms of also helping the individuals, the individuals, so that they could have actually access to an income so that they could actually survive the pandemic. Now, if one have to look going forward to say, what is remaining or what else can actually be done to help not only the banking sector or not only the financial sector, but the financial sector as well as the economy. If I may start, on the entire economy, what needs to be emphasized is the issue of vaccination. Because vaccination have now become not only a healthy policy, but it should actually be seen as an economic policy. Because unless we vaccinate, majority, and many of the earlier speakers in this conference have actually alluded to that. If only we can actually vaccinate, that is the only thing that is left with us as a policy tool, I think, to kickstart the economy. But of course, one should also understand that vaccination does not only depend on the Namibian government, but it also depends on what other countries are actually doing. Because we could vaccinate, but if other countries are still, their economy or their population is not well vaccinated, it will be difficult for them to open up to Namibia. And of course, we are all aware that Namibia is a small open economy, meaning that our income is actually dependent on exports. And if we won't be able to export to China, to the European Union, to America, to America, it would actually be difficult for us to kickstart economic activity. So what I'm trying to argue is that vaccination have actually need to be done on both sides, both within Namibia as well as in our major trading countries. Now, that is on the vaccination policy. Now, on the fiscal space, what can actually the government do? Of course, it's actually very limited. Like we are all aware that the debt of government have actually increased. And part to that, it's because of COVID, such that the government have actually turned from investing in issues such as actually infrastructure development to the fight of COVID. And of course, the debt, with a rising debt level because of COVID, it becomes very difficult for government to continue to, I think, to sustain or to support the economy. That brings in the aspect of the private sector. The private sector, like the earlier speaker have said, have got a key role to play in terms of actually helping kickstart economic activities, so that to help or to touch hands with the government and in the fight of COVID and resuscitate economic activities in Namibia. Now, more specific for the central bank and NAMFISA, of course, what the two institutions can actually do is to hold on with the expansionary policies that they have. We need interest rates to continue to be low. Of course, we need continuation of those measures that were imposed by the central bank together with NAMFISA, so as to help the economy. Having said that, for the entire private sector, we need to look at issues of actually ensuring that, for example, for those companies that are doing well, they should, as a policy going forward, do away with paying up of bonuses as well as salary increments. Because what is the need of giving up bonuses for those companies that are doing well, while the economy is actually not doing well? So if you look at other countries, Mauritius, for example, those are the policies that actually they're imposing to ensure that if you are in a crisis like this, either companies as part of the macro-prudential regulation, both banks, non-bank financial institutions should actually do away with paying up of performance bonuses and also granting of salary increments so that they can resource, or they should direct those funds to the fight of COVID, so that once the economy kickstarts, probably then they could actually return to normality. Having said that, from the outlook perspective, as a central bank, we expect, or we are projecting GDP to expand to 1.4%. That is for Namibia in 2021, and with a further strengthening to 3.4% in 2022. Of course, these projections would actually be based on base effects, such that because 2020 we have actually registered a very significant negative growth. So whatever is going to happen, because last year most of the economic activities was actually closed. And if you look at 2021, the economy have been open most of the time. And hence we project that there would be a positive growth in 2020, in 2021, and 2022. But of course, I have to caution to say, despite these projections, going forward, the growth projection would actually depend on COVID-19. Of course, we see that in China, there are already 2 variants of COVID that have actually come. And of course, it's going to depend on how those countries, such as China, Europe, are actually going to respond to COVID, and how we're gonna be hit by COVID. So anything is possible, but for the time being, we expect that hopefully the countries are better equipped now to deal with COVID because of the high number of vaccination than when COVID actually started. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you, sir, for that comprehensive response. Quite interestingly, I just read an ILO report for 2021, and they highlight that the lesser developed countries have responded with policy initiatives on 3 fronts. One, it's the one you have touched now, is to strengthen healthcare. 2 is the expansion of social protection to the most vulnerable. And 3 is supporting private sector with relief funds or tax holidays or something like that. So you've touched on 2 of those already in your conversation now. Thank you very much for that. I'm moving on to Dr. Mukesi. Dr. Mukesi, I'm going to have a double-barreled question for you, sir. The pandemic is about health in the main. And of course, as we are discussing, its associated impacts in terms of the economy. What are the areas of focus for collaboration in the areas of public health to deal with this particular pandemic, but also other health shocks that we may experience moving forward? And the second part is, in your view, how did we do as a country in dealing with this pandemic on the health front? We can see you and we can hear you.
Thank you, moderator. And good afternoon, colleagues. I like the question, the 2 barrels, very interesting barrels to the question. It is quite interesting that you've already summed up the part of what I wanted to say, which is my initial remark, that yes, COVID-19 came in as a health issue. And when it hit our shores, we were all looking at it like, well, this is a health problem. What are the health people going to do? But in no time, we were all hit by these public health regulations and protocols, so much that we quickly realized that it isn't just a health issue, but it is just an issue that we had to deal with. So many people wrote that it was a health pandemic, and then quickly the language changed to a pandemic. They scratched off the health part of the pandemic. How did this lead to a change in perception? Because the pandemic came and hit everyone. We thought it was going to hit the health sector, which it did, but we started to see a profound effect on the economy, which colleagues have been alluding to now quite well. Those who are in the economic sector, I think they are really doing a good job of it. The economic sector was hit hard, and other sectors which also fit into the economy, but which I can single out that were hit hard: education, travel, trade, tourism, and hospitality. It's now a matter of public knowledge how these were impacted by COVID-19. Now, this is an issue that was interesting because when COVID hit, these sectors, one, had to shut down. Two, they were subjected to health protocols, which were specifically health. What am I saying here? You could walk into any shop, and before you get into a shop, you had to have your temperature taken at the door. That's if there was no lockdown, that is. So that day you are allowed to go to the shop, you have to stand there, and someone at the door had to take your temperature and record your details. At the end of the day, if we need to follow you up, we will follow you up. That is part of public health surveillance. We need to find out who was in contact with who. So we're subjected to all these health protocols without even knowing it. At the end of the day, we started to take notice that this is an issue we cannot just leave to health and say, you health people deal with it. We all had to be involved. Now, that brings me to a very, very interesting part of a discussion here. Before COVID hit, statistics will tell you that 75% of the total health expenditure in Namibia is funded from domestic resources. That's 75%. Now, with that, most of it, and I'm treading carefully here, a large portion of which I understand there is another portion which is also funded by other people, but the large portion is funded by the government of the Republic of Namibia. So the government funds most of the total health expenditure. Not only that, if you go back to healthcare expenditure, when I'm talking about healthcare expenditure, I'm looking at the amount or the money that we spend on treating people and making sure that they are fine, they go to hospital, they get treatment and all sorts of things. That's healthcare expenditure. That, if you look at that, 54% of it is paid in by government. Only 11% is paid by employers, and 16% is funded by individuals. So, which basically means we left most of what we would call health to government to fund and make sure that the health sector runs. And like I said, I'm treading very carefully here because there are quite some private sectors which are quite active in the health sector. So I do appreciate that component, but I can't ignore the fact that the largest portion of it is funded by the government. Now, having said that, in the small narrative I gave in the beginning, after we were hit by COVID and it disrupted all our activities in the economy, education, and trade, and everything, like I said, what did we see after that? Massive public-private partnerships come into play to support the Ministry of Health and Social Services. Why was this necessary? Because we realized without supporting the Ministry of Health and Social Services to fix this health problem, we were not going to operate anyway in whatever sector we thought we were operating in. So this health issue became our issue. If we can't fix the health issue, we will not do mining. If we can't fix this, we will not sell, even trade, whatever it was. We also saw at the same time government increasing funding to the health sector. We saw a lot of partnerships being formed between development partners, the ones that we would generally call donors. They came in, we had old ones who increased more funding, put in more funding to the health sector, and we even had new ones coming in on board to support our health sector. this was not all. We even had the regional bodies now coming in. We saw SADC countries coming in to help each other. We have this health issue. Can we give you this? Can we give you that? The AEU was involved. We saw other countries coming in, even from as far as Europe, as individual countries and as blocks like the EU coming in to assist us as well to fight the pandemic. Why is this small narrative important? It is going to answer your question, Chair, of what collaborations can we have now for this pandemic and going forward. Initially, we left health to the government, but COVID has shown us that the private sector can actually play a huge role in the health sector. Those who have been playing a role, yes, we acknowledge that, but we saw that more and more people can actually come in to fund health, not just to fix the current pandemic, but moving forward. Because what we saw was a concerted effort by everyone concerned to say, let's make sure that our health sector stands. And this came after we realized that there were frailties and fragilities within our health sector that we started to notice, cracks appearing, and we couldn't cope with this or that. We saw in many cases oxygen running out. There was no oxygen tank at this hospital. There were only 2 oxygen tanks at the other hospital. These things have been there over the years. Yes, one might argue that, of course, the pandemic stretches because then you've got more people who are sick and so forth and so forth. Yeah, that is a good point of argument. But we had deficiencies and deficits within the health sector that were long-standing, and we didn't address it. Why? Because we left all the work to the government to do. Now, we now have realized that private sector can actually come in and assist government in fixing this, in making sure that we have got a health sector that we can look at and say, okay, even if something comes, we have got something to stand on. And I go back to the initial address that even the best health systems could not cope with the pandemic. Now, if that is the case, you also imagine our health sector, which was struggling because we largely left it to the government to look at and fund. How was it going to cope, and how much were we going to survive on if we hadn't had the support that we got now later on from the private sector? Now, Chair, going forward, the collaborations that have already been shown to be possible are the collaborations we need. We have seen how the private sector has come in and assisted the Ministry of Health. We have seen how private people, private citizens have come in to assist in their own way the Ministry of Health. Why am I talking about the Ministry of Health and not talking about everybody? Because the Ministry of Health is the focal point here in terms of fighting the pandemic. So we need to capacitate the ministry in many, many ways for us to be able to fix this current pandemic and survive the future pandemics in a way that doesn't disrupt as much as it did now. So we have to learn some lessons from this current situation. So what do we need to partner the ministry to do? That is the maybe the question that will be asked now. We need to capacitate the ministry. Ministry has got to be supported. We have to come up with ways and initiatives that will strengthen our public health systems. So much that if anything comes, we are in a position to stand on our public health systems to address our problem. This takes me a little bit back to the issue that before COVID hit, we already had a problem with the hepatitis E in the country. And it largely hit the informal settlements. I'm not going to repeat what the other speakers spoke of when they're talking about the inequalities in our responses and in how we manage our systems before pandemics. We responded to hepatitis E more like it was a problem in the informal settlement. And as much as there were efforts to address it, we didn't see much of private sector involvement. Why? Because there wasn't much disruption to business elsewhere. It was only a few people, a couple of hundreds of thousands people infected and a couple who died in the informal settlements. COVID changed all that. So we need to have public health systems that can stand in the face of a pandemic. And this is where we need to partner ministry to capacitate it and be able to stand when we have the next pandemic, which is inevitable because pandemics come every time anyway. So the last one that we are going to have, right? So in this particular case, what would we do? What would we collaborate on to capacitate ministry? We need to build the human resource capital of ministry. The Ministry of Health has got what they call a human resource plan, human resource for health plan. They look at how many people do we need in a field, this field, how many fields do we have, and how many people do we need in each of the fields. Now, after COVID hit, we started to see deficiencies that never existed before. We realized we needed a cadre of this nature, but they are not there. We need a cadre of that nature, but we only have got one. But in this particular case, we might need more. So we need to go back, revisit to say, so are we still comfortable with not having that cadre or having few of those? And that is contained within what we call the Human Resource for Health plan, which the Ministry of Health has. So we might need to revisit that and help them to capacitate that section, our human resource. We also need to partner ministry to build very robust public health systems and infrastructure that can withstand the pandemic or any other pandemic that is going to come to some extent. Yes, it might fold under pressure because obviously, like we saw, we couldn't cope. So did many countries. Like we had the issue of Italy, and we saw the pictures from Spain, people lying in the corridors and dying in corridors of hospitals. We saw the pictures from India, bodies being thrown in the street because people could not afford to cremate their own bodies to bury them. These are the pictures that we saw. So in any way, we are going to have problems. But before we do, can we capacitate ourselves enough to make sure that if something happens, we can stand on something? Now, so we need to have those robust health systems, public health systems and infrastructure that are going to help us to improve our responsiveness to this current pandemic, because it's still here, and any other future pandemic which might arise. We need to build very good health information systems. You need to hear how many cases are where, who is infected, which area is a hotspot, which areas should we avoid going to. If I go to that area, that is not a good area to go to because now there are so many positive cases. You need to hear that information, but we can only have that kind of information together if we build very, very good health information systems. We need to train and retain public health experts. And I think colleagues in HR would look at it as part of managing talent here, to train public health experts and be able to retain them. We do train public health experts. So I don't want people to come back and say, but we are being trained here, but we don't do a good job of retaining our good people. So they leave. And when they leave, we train again. And when we do that, we go into this cycle of having new people. We need leadership, good leadership during a pandemic. And you can only have good leadership when you retain good leaders who are going to lead in a time of a crisis. We don't want new people to start learning on the job when a pandemic is hotting up. So we don't need that. The other part that we need to address is we need to partner universities in training and research. And I think this is a point that needs to be unpacked on its own. What is the role of universities in a pandemic? I think that is the whole point, but we need to partner universities in training and research and build existing or improve existing infrastructure. Assist the people who are training to train better, and also the health systems to be updated to make sure that what we are training is relevant to what is happening in industry. We are still going back to methods that were done in the 90s and 80s. And the world has moved. We saw that with the pandemic now. We want to give oxygen. We start to realize, well, we don't have enough oxygen points. but we need a command to come and install something new that we don't have. So we need that to be put together, and if people can partner, collaborate to build those things, we will get a better response. We need to build and improve our diagnostic and surveillance systems. We all here have been subjected to a COVID test, or a member of the family has been subjected to a COVID test here and there, whether for diagnostic purposes, or we wanted to travel, or we came into contact with a positive case, or we wanted to get out of quarantine, whatever it was. And we saw how long it took for you to get your result. That should not happen. You should walk in, get your result, and get out in a few minutes. But we took sometimes weeks waiting for a result to come. So we need to collaborate and make sure that we capacitate the diagnostic services and our surveillance systems. You don't have to wait for a week for someone to come and say you are cleared of COVID. Well after your quarantine is expired. There are deficits there in our system. Right, so much of what I'm saying goes to, we need to build stronger public health and academia collaborations. If we don't collaborate with academics, it is difficult for us to build what we have here, because most of what I have said starts at universities. And if we can make sure that universities play a good role in a pandemic, I think we can address some of the things I've alluded to here. Now, I wanted to quickly go to your second part of the question so that I don't spend all the time speaking to one point. How did we do as a country in response to the pandemic? If you remember quite well, we went on lockdown when we had 6 cases, just 6 cases, and we were put on lockdown. You could not even peep through the window during that time, because that's how we thought we're not supposed to do. Now, if you look at the last wave that we hit sometimes around 3,000 cases, but people were still moving around. What did this say to us? You could only, or the government could only respond as much as the information was available. The government could only make a response or provide guidance based on the scientific evidence which was available at the time. So scientific evidence became the key in determining what we do next. And one of the things that we learned through the pandemic is that the only constant in a pandemic is change. And all we have to do is to adapt. So the 2 things which are quite significant during our response was scientific evidence and change. The government did a good job in listening to those 2. There were times when we wanted, as people, the government to remove the lockdown. Why are they not removing the lockdown? Why are they not doing this? Why are they not allowing us to travel? I need to go to the next town. But everything that the government did was based on the available scientific evidence. And when the situation changed, the government also had to change, to adapt. And you could not ignore what other countries were doing, because we were not in isolation. Whatever South Africa was doing, we had to be in sync with South Africa. Why? Because there's trade. You can't close the borders and South Africa opens their border, or the reverse. Now the truck drivers are stuck at the border and they can't cross. So we had to go in line with what other countries in the region and globally were doing. So in my own opinion, the government did quite well in response to the pandemic. But just to sum it up, people might ask, so how is it that we had these problems like we had in the last wave, where we saw a lot of people dying, a lot of infections happening? Everything that was done was based on available evidence, scientific evidence. If the evidence is that when people wear masks, they can go out into the public and walk around and be fine, that is the scientific evidence of the day. The government announces we can go into the public, wear your mask, sanitize, do this and that. And in any pandemic, there are times when one wave might be worse than the other. That is quite normal in a pandemic. We mourn the deaths, yes, but from a health perspective, it's things that we expect. You've got more infections, you are going to experience a lot of deaths. So, Chair, now our response is now on vaccination, like the colleague said. Let's collaborate on vaccination. That is, I think, the focal point now. Thank you, Chair. I think I have answered a few things there.
Yes, Dr. Mukesi, thank you. You've dealt very well with the double-barreled question I posed there, so thank you for that. I'm now moving to Mr. Ron with my next question. No one was spared due to the interruption of flow of goods and services from manufacturing countries like South Africa and elsewhere. We got used to the fact that important consumables are not on the shelves anymore, we've run out, and so on and so forth. It also highlighted the risk of being food insecure. How has the pandemic impacted the supply chain in Namibia? If you can quickly respond to that. Maybe just before you start, we have about 45 minutes left, and I have about 3 or 4 more questions, and I would like us to just maybe keep it a little bit closer to the question that I'm asking. Please, Mr. Ron, the floor is yours. Mr. Ron, are you still there?
Sorry, yeah, I'm just not too familiar with Zoom. So yeah, I think it has had, I do have a presentation, but maybe I'll just flip through the slides by myself and then I can send it afterwards. From the supply chain perspective, I think Namibia, you know, has a vision that it should be the SADC logistics hub. We're well positioned for that. We've had a port expansion just before lockdown and so forth. And we have the Walfish Bay corridor initiative that's been going for quite some time. And we saw great growth, not great, but we saw growth in the logistics vision that Namibia has. And then the pandemic hit and everything came to a standstill. So in the supply chain environment, when a major supply chain disruption occurs, it's commonly referred to as a black swan event. And these are high impact, low likelihood occurrences that are typically not on your everyday radar. But knowing exactly where your product is in the supply chain is never more important than during these instances. So what was the impact of such a black swan event in Namibia? From a negative point of view, there was loss of revenue. We all felt it. Businesses were closed down, they were shut down. There were huge delays, particularly on the borders, that impacted a lot of flow of goods and also started to stereotype truck drivers and put a lot of pressure on them, being said that they were they were carrying the pandemic even further. What we also saw was goods became more expensive and still is due to new PPE compliances and additional COVID requirements in manufacturing goods and how factories had to now adjust to that. And we're still feeling the brunt of that right now in terms of where we currently sit in the supply chain from a mining perspective. There are still employee strikes and failures on machinery and so forth. And then, of course, loss of jobs that occurred due to the pandemic, loss of jobs specifically in the supply chain sector. We also saw the rise of robotics, where companies now have introduced digital machinery, and this is a negative and a positive. In the negative sense, obviously it's linked to job loss, and in the positive, it's linked to efficiency and digitalizing the supply chain. From a positive perspective, in terms of the Black Swan event, was that supply chains became more visible. There was a spotlight on supply chains, and its strategic positioning was elevated. Suddenly, it became known that we may not have toilet paper, or we may not be able to produce to have certain goods in our shops and so forth. And then what we saw, and what a earlier speaker also mentioned, was business and government actually came together. And specifically, DEP Marine was quite involved, or the NUMDEP group, in the supply of oxygen and assisting AFROX in mobilizing additional oxygen. We also saw more innovation, like right now, Anglo-American is looking at carbon printing our basic spare parts like bearings and bolts and nuts. And we're going to do carbon. We're busy with a carbon printing project so that we can do that in South Africa. We also experienced local supply entrepreneurship. What we saw was people started becoming very innovative at home and sussing out opportunity to become self-sustainable and looking for new ways to survive in this collapsed economy. And then it was also a test of resilience of the supply chain network. How resilient were you able to respond to something like the pandemic? And it showed you the gaps, but it also showed you the opportunities of repositioning how you would otherwise do business. And for me, the supply chain, whether it's a pandemic or not, we needed to operate. So from a supply chain procurement professional perspective, is a pandemic cannot be an excuse for lack of service delivery. We still needed to deliver the right product at the right place, at the right time, and at an affordable price. And that was the underlying message that was pumped through our organization. In addition to this pandemic environment, we were a policy was implemented about ethical sourcing, and that meant that additional requirements came when we looked at a supplier to understand their ethics around the product, which include how are they handling the pandemic from their perspective and whether it matched our values. So that was how it impacted us from a business perspective. And then I know that Brighton Simasiko also wrote a wonderful report in December last year on the Namibia state of logistics, December 2020, along with other colleagues and organizations. And they had quite a good survey towards the end around how it really impacted. And the top things that came out was unemployment, consumer, the supply chain jam from manufacturing through to consumers, reduced revenue basis for logistics, and then the industry growth has been impacted and is less competitive. So that in a nutshell was how this pandemic impacted the supply chains. But from our side, from the industry perspective, the show needed to go on, and we needed to assist our suppliers as best we can. We, from a collaborative point of view, to still deliver to be able to meet our demands as a mining company. Thanks.
Thank you. I think you're right about the focus on supply chain. If global leaders, people like Putin and Biden, start talking about securing supply chains, then you know that there is a great need to look at that and to secure them. Thank you for that. I'm now going to pose a question to Ms. Nandago. The tourism sector has suffered significant losses, perhaps the biggest in the Namibian economy. I'm not sure, I don't have the figures. What approaches should we consider to ensure a turnaround in this sector?
Thank you very much for the question again. And yeah, the tourism sector is the one that suffered the brunt of the pandemic. It contracted by about 33.4% last year, which is quite a large contraction. And I think, first of all, Namibia is a beautiful destination. We have a lot of unique tourism sites. So I think we're quite well positioned in terms of that. I think people love to come to Namibia. It's quiet, it's vast. So we are quite well positioned. So we have that working in our favor. However, I think one of the issues at the moment in terms of turning the tourism sector around is that the requirements to come into the country are still quite stringent if we compare it to other countries. So for example, if you want to come into Namibia, you need a PCR test. It should be 7 days old. For some airlines, they actually say it should be 72 hours old. And that really can be a hindrance in terms of attracting tourists to the country, just because of the administrative and financial implications of that. So for example, if a family of 4 wants to travel from South Africa or from anywhere really, they basically need to budget around 7,000 to 8,000 just for tests, because you need one to come in and you need one to exit the country as well. So I think that is one of the hindrances in terms of sort of reviving the tourism sector, or to the levels that we'd want it to go to. So I think my opinion is that we should probably relax some of these requirements. And one way we can do that is by, for example, allowing individuals who have been vaccinated and who can present proof of vaccination, so allowing them to come in without having to do that PCR test, because vaccinated individuals, as we know, are much less low risk. So I think that's one of the approaches that we can take in order to turn the tourism sector around, just making it easier for individuals to come into the country and not making it so administrative and financially cumbersome. I think the second issue, hanging on to that point about vaccinations, and I think vaccinations have been spoken about a lot today during this conference, but one of the ways in the medium to longer term, if we want to really increase or turn around our tourism sector, is really to make sure that we get our vaccination rates to the levels that we'd want to. So I think at the moment we have about 10% of the population fully vaccinated. Our herd immunity target is 60%, so we are quite far away from that target. If we continue to vaccinate at the rate that we are now, we'll probably only have that herd immunity reached in, I think, 2026 or even later. And the reason why vaccination is very important for the tourism sector is because, first of all, if we do not have enough individuals vaccinated, that gives us the risk of further COVID waves, like the third wave that we saw during June and July this year. And what that means is then we'll have to have stricter lockdowns, curfews, travel restrictions between the towns, etc. So similar to what happened during the third wave that we observed this year. So of course, that is very detrimental to tourism, not only from a foreign tourism perspective, but also for domestic tourism perspective. As we know, the domestic tourism market really kept some of the tourism operators afloat during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we should not also forget about that market, and that market is impacted by continuous lockdowns or stricter travel restrictions or COVID restrictions. So this sort of stop and start approach to the economy is not very conducive for tourism revival. The second thing that relates to vaccinations is that if we do have these continuous waves, like the one we saw during June, July, that means that a lot of countries will continue to put us on their red list or their black list. Again, that also happened during the third wave, where the UK, for example, put us on their red list. The United Arab Emirates also put us on their red list, and the CDC in the United States also put us on their red list, and I think Germany also put us on their red list. So that has quite severe implications for tourism, because that means people aren't really comfortable to to come into the country. So I think I'd say those are the two key things we need to do to revive the tourism industry. I think we have quite good tourism services already. We have great landscapes. And so if we can just get that, the vaccination rate up and also make it a little bit easier for tourists to come into the country, I think that will be quite a good approach to help to restart the tourism sector. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Ms. Nandago. Quite on point. I think many of the people in this room probably were shaking their heads when you were talking. I have two more questions. The first would be for Dr. Mushendami, and the last question I leave for Dr. Mukese before we wrap up the session. So, Dr. Mushendami, as a country and as a continent, how would you assess our readiness to revive our economy? For example, what policy directives are in place to deal with the crisis, and what policy directives should we consider in order to revive our economy?
Thank you, moderator. Perhaps I'm not going to restrict myself to what we should do as a country, but collective, together with other countries. Right. Now, to start with, just want to put it in perspective to say, of course, we have actually seen in October, the IMF World Economic Outlook, they actually reduced the world, the growth for 2021 to 5.9%, and further to 4.9% in 2022. But of course, if one have to look into what transpired in 2020, that is still an increment, because 2020 we saw the world contracting by 3.1%. And of course, we also see emerging markets of which we are part. Their growth is actually projected to remain steady at 3.7% in 2021 and 2022, from a contraction of 1.7%. Now, coming to the policies that needs to be put in place, I'll classify them in three, and this applies to both Namibia as well as the entire world. I'll start with the fiscal policy. On the fiscal front, governments both in Namibia as well as the world at large need to ensure that fiscal policy should actually be focused to mitigate the COVID pandemic. That should be the center of fiscal policy going forward. On the monetary front, of course, central banks should actually ensure that the expansionary monetary policy that is actually in place should be maintained through lower interest rates. Of course, there is a risk that we see projecting, especially in 2022, that hopefully inflation is likely going to pick up in major countries as well as the US, Europe, as well as developing countries. Of course, we have what we have actually seen, for example, in Europe of recent, their target inflation rate is 2%. But in their recent monetary policy decision, though that inflation have actually increased to 4%, they decided to hold interest rates steady rather than increasing them, because of the need to keep monetary policy supportive of economic activity. And of course, that's what we need to ensure, both as Namibia as well as the world at large, that monetary policy should continue to support economic activities. Collectively, as countries, both developing and advanced economies should actually ensure that they collaborate in terms of ensuring that the global access to the vaccines is guaranteed and enhanced. Now, on the international front, for the international organization, such as the World Bank and the IMF, they have actually to ensure that global global liquidity or international liquidity is guaranteed, and they should be able to provide balance of payment support to countries that are in need of such support. Furthermore, the World Bank as well as the IMF should actually ensure that countries that are experiencing high debt levels are given relief so that they can actually be able to handle the pandemic. Moderator, I'll stop here. I think that's what we need to do collectively as a country, as well as the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. And your reference to access to vaccines actually leads to my next question for Dr. Mukesi. Vaccine colonization has become the force so strong, has come to the fore so strong soon after vaccines became available. What can we do as a continent, and perhaps all lesser developed countries, or in terms of dealing with this phenomena now for COVID, but more importantly, for future health shocks that we may experience? Dr. Mukesi.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. What an interesting question, really. It is much of a political question than it is actually of a health or a science question, basically. When I was listening to you ask the question, I was going back to 1881, the scramble for Africa and the partition. That is quite common in history when we go back to our history books. Right, but I will not be tempted to do so. The controversy that is now what people are terming vaccine colonization is now more political than it is actually a health issue. Although obviously because of the pandemic, we still refer to it as a health problem. But before we get into the health side of it, let's look at what has happened before. Africa has had a fair share of its health problems or disease problems. We have had HIV, we have had TB, which are still there and bothering us in large terms, if I should put it that way. Malaria is still here, killing people on the continent. We have had Ebola. I made reference to hepatitis E in our own setting. So we have had so many health problems that we have gone through over the years, and some of them have become a part of us. And you would have hoped that from these health problems, as a people, we would have learned a thing or two to stay and be on our own feet. This is quite, for me, concerning, because in these programs that I've mentioned, we still rely very, very much on donors to sustain those programs. Countries like Namibia are quite fortunate because when donor funding decreased drastically after the height of the HIV epidemic, we saw the government chipping in and coming into the fore and really funding most of the programs. But there is still some substantial amount of donor funding that is there. I can't resist to point out that if you look at donor funding, it accounts for 0.2% of healthcare funding in the world. But if you look at low income countries, 27% of their healthcare funding is donor funded. And 3% is for low middle income countries. So we still have got substantial reliance on donor funding, so much that we do not hold our own to account to improve the healthcare system so that we can survive and be on our own 2 feet. That is, for me, the basis of you not being colonized, because you can stand on your own. I am not ignoring the fact that there are so many challenges, historical or otherwise, that lead to us not being able to fund our own systems. This leads to the very question that we have, that why is that we can't produce our own vaccines, that we have to rely on other people to give us vaccines, and then we want to pressure them to give us vaccines. Yes, they do have better technology, which they've developed over years, and those in politics or doing political science will argue that, yes, they used part of our resources and still do. If you look at natural resources, whatever else that they are using from us. But the question is, knowing that this is the case, what have we done as a people to try and stand our own 2 feet? How have we capacitated ourselves to try and be independent and not depend on the same people over and over, and then go back to complain that we are not getting enough? For me, that's a begging question, which comes from the experience that we still have with our own diseases that have been a part of us for years. What have we learned from there? Very little, if I should say. And we still rely on the same countries that we are now pressuring for vaccines. They are the same countries supporting our healthcare systems on the things I have said earlier on. Chair, what am I saying here? As much as vaccine colonization or politicization, if I can put it like that, is something that we really have to fix, because in a pandemic, no one wins until everybody wins. We need to fix that, yes, but also we need to introspect as a people to see next time a pandemic hits again, what are the lessons that we have drawn from COVID and what have we done about it? We might find ourselves still in the same situation or worse off. We have had HIV for very long. What lessons do we draw from HIV that will allow us to survive COVID or to do better with COVID, with TB and other things? So those are things I think as a people, we need to introspect before we pressure the same people to give us and give us and give us. And then after that, they come back and fund our other programs at the same time. That is an issue I think that needs unpacking. Right, but we do not negate that as of now, there are efforts on the ground to try and capacitate Africa so that Africa can produce its own vaccines. I'm looking at countries like Rwanda, which is now going to partner with biotech, the one producing the Pfizer vaccine. We have got in South Africa, Johnson & Johnson, even biotech is in there as well. We have got Senegal, Egypt producing the Sinovac, and Morocco, the Sinovac already, and Sputnik V. Those countries are already partnering with these other multinational companies to try and produce vaccines for Africa. But what are we doing ourselves as a people so that we do not rely, because the same companies are not African companies, they are not our own companies. Yes, it is important for them to come in and because of patenting and also for technology transfer to assist us in that regard. But how have we improved funding in research so that we can stand on our own and try to not rely on the same countries over and over? It is a question for me that is disturbing, because we seem to lie low, and then when we have got a problem, we point to, but they're not giving us. How much are we spending on funding health? It is interesting and quite good for Namibia that the Namibian government spends more on health than most countries which are at the same level of its GDP per capita. If you look at it, Namibia is 9%, most countries are on 6%. The WHO obviously says you should have 5%. Namibia is on 9%, which is quite good. But at the same time, we need as low or low resource countries, poor countries, if you will, to start thinking of not relying when the next pandemic is, to say, okay, what is Europe doing for us? What is the West doing for us? What is the States doing for us? To capacitate ourselves, build our own laboratories, build our own factories, and support our own research, support our own academics to do research which works for us. So I think I'll stop there, otherwise I'll keep on going. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mkese. Thank you for that. That brings us to the end of our session today. There is still a few minutes left. So I was just wondering if we can have maybe a few questions to the panelists, and then we can close thereafter. So I open the floor for raising your hand if you have any questions or contributions that you would like to make to the discussion we've had today on our sub-theme of health, employment, digital transformation, and economic sustainability. I see no hands so far. Okay. Okay. I guess it's the graveyard session, you know, after lunch, we all get, things go downhill. But I think if I can conclude, this was a very enlightening conversation that we've had. It has shed light on each of the sub-themes that we've identified: health, employment, digital transformation, and economic sustainability. And therefore, I want to take this opportunity to thank our participants, to thank our panelists, rather, for their insightful views that they have offered to all of us. I have just looked at the chat session here, and somebody posted that this is a really great contribution for Namibia. As one of such public lecture opportunities for all, it should further be publicized, media to make use of this for COVID-19 information sharing. Yes, indeed, this was that kind of session that we've had. In my introduction with regards to this session, I highlighted a key alert that racial and economic inequalities may deepen unless they are addressed forcefully. And I linked that to what Dr. Makasi concluded with his contribution. And if we can, you know, join forces, rally behind one another as a collective, not as Namibia only, these are the kind of inequalities that we can then deal with successfully before they spiral out of control. And so with that, thank you again, panelists, for your insightful comments and contributions. What was interesting was we had a great blend of the academe and practice engaging on the same platform. And that gives us a broader sense of what we need to look at in terms of the pandemic and the life of the world of work in particular. So Chairperson, Prof. Simente, I'm going to hand over to you, but before I do that, I am going to just thank you for the opportunity that you have granted me to actually moderate the session. I do appreciate it. Thank you for that. And to all and everybody, have an excellent evening and a lovely week ahead. Thank you.
Wow. What can I say further? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator, Dr. Villay, for ably moderating this, technical discussion. It would be difficult to actually convey the message had we not have such capable moderator. Thank you very much and job well done. So we can then say that we really did justice to the theme of this year's Institutional Research Week, which is living in a world of pandemics, and we addressed it thoroughly by looking at different pillars, the health sector, for example, employment, digital transformation, economic sustainability, and so on. So we thoroughly discussed the theme. The streaming, the recordings are available. The media can tap into this and really showcase what Namibia has to offer from academia and also industry specific. Thank you very much. I would also like to really congratulate and to thank the panelists, Mr. In absentia, Solomon Hay, which has been now replaced, not replaced, but represented by, in this case here, sorry for that, Miss Rusa Nandago. I wanted to be specific, so I really need to read and acknowledge. And Miss Rusa Nandago accepted this invite to stand in for Mr. Solomon A just a day ago. And she was so able to really respond and articulate the answers very well. One of such was that she indicated that we need to reskill and really close the gap, skill gap. So important. She mentioned the issue of data analytics, quantitative data analysis, which are key skills required specifically in the financial sector. Thank you very much for articulating that. And you also emphasized the importance of turnaround strategies around the tourism sector, which we really so appreciate. Thank you so much. Mr. Ron Malvaren, thank you so much from DBA. Sorry, yes, if I have just to make it correctly. Yes, she's basically the procurement manager for DB Marine. Sorry, it's DB Marine. I was looking for the word. Thank you very much also for articulating your responses clearly and for accepting our invitation to this panel discussion. You actually elaborated on several areas, the need for culture change, for example, and the culture change is being required because of technology investments that we have. And in this case, you also indicated the need for a mindset change, which works together with a digital DNA. So with that digital DNA, it requires us to be able to work in a hybrid environment and also to balance health issues within COVID and also after or post-COVID. So all that was clearly articulated. And I thank you very much for bringing to the fore these critical issues. Dr. Mushindami, thank you very much from Bank of Namibia. So you really talked economic sense here. You brought forward known and also unknown facts. For example, you indicated that the economy has been contracting already since 2017, and that is not news, but it has been exacerbated by the COVID. So thank you very much for that. And one critical thing that you mentioned is the fact that you indicated that vaccines are critical, very important. And because of that, government plays a critical role, but not just government, but we need collaboration with other countries because we live in a global village. And that really adds to what Prof. Karim yesterday mentioned. The Professor Karim, that was the keynote speaker, indicated that we need solidarity. We need actually to partner with other countries and see what we can do together. Thank you very much, Dr. Mushindami, for that. Then Dr. Mukezi articulated quite a number of issues in terms of academia, in terms of health, in terms of, you didn't want to name it political issues. He rather talked about vaccine colonization. And it's something also that Prof. Karim mentioned yesterday, that there is a need for equity when it comes to distribution of vaccines. But very important, Dr. Mukezi indicated the need for public health and academia collaboration so that we can capacitate the public health sector in issues regarding to the pandemic. Very well presented. And yes, with that, I'm simply saying thank you very much, moderator and panelists, for that. Now, without further ado, I would like to recognize in our midst the acting DVC Innovation and Research, DVC Research and Innovation is the correct title, Dr. Colin Stanley, who is in our midst. By the virtue of his portfolio, he would be the person to deliver the final vote of thanks. However, he also agreed that we then call on Prof. Matipida, who is the co-chair of the organizing committee. So with that, we are saying, Dr. Colin, thank you very much for your leadership, for your guidance in the preparation of this event and the outcome thereof. It's through your vision and leadership. I would also like to thank, in this case, the acting VC, Dr. Nikondo, for their leadership. Without further ado, colleagues, let me then call the right person to do the vote of thanks. And in this case, it's Professor Lovemore, who has been the co-chair of the organizing committee of this research week. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. The Namibia University of Science and Technology Institutional Research Week. On behalf of the host, the Faculty of Management Sciences, all faculties, the university community, the organizing community, and all present here, I want to thank you all for making this occasion a success. I would also like to extend my vote of thanks to all the delegates that graced this occasion outside their busy schedule, most importantly, to come and share their thought-provoking deliberations, making excellent presentations, thoughtful discourse, making the Institutional Research Week very meaningful and interesting and relevant, and knowledge and experience on living in the world of pandemics. Please allow me to express our deep sense of appreciation for all presenters and the panelists who took part in this Institutional Research Week from day one up to today, for the depth of knowledge shared with us during the entire program events. It is my conviction that we leave this platform today with vast knowledge and information on living in the world of pandemics. We now know more than what we knew about living in the world of pandemics. Our guests of honor and all the participants were sterling in their presentations that will keep us reflecting in time to come. They provided informed discussions on living in the world of pandemics, permeating into the readiness of responses to the pandemic by the various responsible authorities, the effects, mitigatory measures to curtail the pandemic, and many more. Above all, providing the way forward as we continue to live in the world of pandemics. Indeed, they provided comfort to most of us. We were in suspense in living in the world of pandemics. Thank you very much for the most informative sessions we witnessed in this entire occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reiterate that an event of this nature cannot be successful with a single person. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation and thanks to all those who made this occasion a success. It was an honor to host all of you at NUST. I cannot thank everyone enough for their informed and willingness and interactive and discussions and participation in this occasion. With these few words, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all and God bless. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you, everyone. We can then declare the congregation dissolved. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Goodbye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Prof. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Prof, for a well-coordinated event.
Thank you.